Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is right now. Hello, how are you? I hope you're doing well. My name is David Parsons, and you are listening to Nostalgia Trap. I have a wonderful conversation for you today with one of our favorite American historians. His name is Michael Brenes. He was actually on the program, episode 82, if you want to go back in the Nostalgia Trap archives. And if you listen to that episode, you will learn that Mike and I went to the CUNY Graduate Center many years ago when we were both young, hopeful American historians. And actually, you know, some of this conversation in which we catch up, we learn how much things have changed and how much we've changed and how much our attitudes about American history have changed over these years. Mike was working on a book last time we spoke to him. That book is out now, and it's one that everyone who listens to Nostalgia Trap should buy and read and think about, because it is, for me, a really, really important entry into the larger historiography of the Cold War. It's called For Might and Right: Cold War Defense Spending and the Remaking of American Democracy. And it's got some mind-blowing stuff in it. We talk about some of that mind-blowing stuff. I pull out some of the quotes that both me and Justin Rogers Cooper were very impressed with in terms of Mike's skill at balancing his analysis and with the history that he's telling. For me, again, this totally reopened the way we think about the Cold War. And I'm just really proud to have gone to be able to say I went to school with Mike Brenes, and we had conversations about American history that were memorable to me back then. And it's nice to catch up with him and continue that conversation in 2020, because we end this conversation in part with talking about Mike's future projects. And when I talked to him last time, episode 82, a couple years ago, he was thinking about doing a biography of Hubert Humphrey. And just stay tuned in this conversation and listen to what he has to say about that now and why he's not as interested in doing a bio of Hubert Humphrey. Really, really, I think important stuff about how the history we live through affects the types of history we want to tell. So this was a really, really fun conversation, a classic Nostalgia Trap type conversation. And again, go get his book For Might and Right: Cold War Defense Spending and the Remaking of American Democracy. So we'll get to Mike in a second. Just want to mention our Patreon. We got lots of stuff going on there. And I want to thank all the people who are joining the Patreon lately. It's been really fun to meet new people. It's been especially fun to see people showing up to the YouTube live streams that we do on Thursdays at 1 p.m. Pacific time, and then post that audio up on the Patreon for people to listen to that couldn't make the live stream. We're more and more, we're ripping off pieces of pop culture from the 80s and 90s and 2000s and trying to use those pieces to try and figure out something about our lives and the history that we've lived through. So last week we put up an episode about Goodfellas with Danny Bessner, which is a movie that is a part of my DNA in a very powerful way, and it was fun to talk with Danny and try to unpack why that is. So again, if you're interested in supporting the show, hearing more about what we have to say, particularly about pop culture and politics, go over to patreon.com/nostalgiatrap. You can join for $5 a month and cancel whenever you want. It's especially important to me now as we enter into austerity in the academy, and my job as an adjunct instructor becomes more and more difficult to find classes, etc. I've detailed some of my sad story on Twitter, but either way, I just want to thank the people that are reaching out and saying nice things about the podcast and subscribing, etc., etc. It's really it makes me feel good, and it makes us that produce the show feel good as well. So thanks so much, and I hope you enjoy this conversation. Here is me talking with Michael Brenes. All right, well, Mike Brenes, thanks so much for being back on Nostalgia Trap, a return visit. Good to see you.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. This is cool. Lots of fun.
I just took a drive and listened to our first episode together, which was episode 82, for those who want to go back in the archives. And it's funny because I was just listening to you and listening to us talk, and we talked a lot about our graduate center experience, but we also talked a lot about the ideas that made their way into your book, which is called For Might and Right: Cold War Defense Spending and the Remaking of American Democracy. So first of all, congratulations on publishing the book.
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate that. It's been too long. So
I'd love to talk to you about that, like the process of writing a book. And this was your dissertation?
Yeah, it was my dissertation. Yep.
Nice.
That's right.
Yeah. So when listening to the last time we talked, it was a lot about sort of this idea of the Cold War coalition. We're just going to get right into the Cold War politics, because I was just reading some of this. You dropped some. I mean, it's funny. No pun intended. You dropped some bombs in this book. I think there's a lot. I think that people who listen to Nostalgia Trap will be especially interested in the way you're connecting American politics and the Cold War and the military-industrial complex. It's really cool stuff. But yeah, the last time we talked, I feel like you were forming a lot of these ideas, and one of them was this idea of the Cold War coalition. So I guess my big question, I don't know if you have an answer, but kind of like, how has your thinking about that evolved into the book? And in other words, like, how do you define that for us in your book?
Yeah, sure. So how it evolved, I would say it evolved because of Trump to a certain extent, or really not so much Trump, but the conversations that people were having about Trump.
Mm-hmm.
In particular, the one which is limited and circular, but the one that people were having about, are Trump supporters racist, nativist, or are they motivated by economic insecurities, anxieties, which is kind of a redo of the class race debates to a certain extent that came out of the 1980s and into the 1990s. And so I think that debate is kind of a stupid one, to be kind of blunt, because obviously, look, yes, many, not all, but many of Trump supporters were racist or expressed racist ideas. They got on board Donald Trump's agenda, which was obviously racist. But some were also, I assume, although many of Trump's supporters came from the 1%, right? Many of Trump's supporters came from those who were able to, or who benefited from his policies, particularly in the past 4 years. But some were also motivated by economic anxieties or insecurities or whatever. And there really was no way to, I think, in terms of American politics, going to be satisfying for people. And that was the whole point of the conversation, was to have this conversation go back and forth. And that really shaped, as I was revising the book, reshaped how I was thinking about the interaction between economic interests and ideology. And one of the things that one of the points I make in the book is that this Cold War coalition, which consists of various people, defense workers make up a big part of it, but also defense executives or executives at defense industries make up a part of it. Private industry too, or members of private industry in general, in communities where the defense industry dominates. But also you have anti-communist / conservative activists who are involved, who are advocating for a larger defense buildup, a massive defense buildup. Throughout the Cold War, the United States is never going to defeat the Soviet Union, they say, unless we dedicate massive amounts of military spending to it. But it also has retired military personnel who are advocating this too, who are mostly on the right, but also on the left. They're navigating various worlds. And you have also union officials, leaders of the AFL-CIO, like George Meany, who are dedicated to defense jobs because of their constituents. And so they're obviously not, conservative on many issues, if any, for the most part. They have conservative tendencies, certainly, but you wouldn't classify George Meany as a conservative necessarily, or a member or even the leadership of the AFL-CIO as conservative. Vis-a-vis other labor unions you would, but not in terms of general American politics. But they're very much in lockstep with conservatives about the need for massive defense building, albeit for their own economic ends. And so what happens in this Cold War coalition is that these people come together around a singular purpose, around a single idea, which is the United States needs to commit and retain its commitment to massive military spending for both national security as well as economic issues. And it creates this merge or marriage of convenience or inconvenience, depending upon how you're putting it, that makes people not necessarily aware that they're in this coalition, but working for the same thing. And it's therefore bipartisan, or it's transpartisan, even crosses left-right divides. And this was something that, was certainly in the origins of the book, which was my dissertation. But I tried to emphasize more in the revised version of it, which is that, economic interests can't be parsed out from or teased out from ideological interests. That people have ideologies, and they get funneled into political coalitions, and people who then take those ideologies and put them into their own politics, and then push them out through their economic anxieties, whatever, about, in this case, defense jobs being cut or defense spending being cut, and that's going to impact their livelihood. It's going to impact their family, and vice versa. That is, economic anxieties amongst defense workers being channeled into a coalition to get jobs or to maintain jobs through the national security state. And then ideological operatives taking, like conservative, again, activists taking those ideas and making them their own, and then making that into an ideology that then gets put out to advocate for massive military spending, which we have till this day. So that was kind of my way to sort of answer Trump or the phenomenon of the Trump, conversation / debates, politics we were having late 2016 through the Cold War.
Yeah, and it's funny because hearing you say that, it makes me realize how much that that sort of like defense spending conversation is sort of not present in the way people talk about why Trump voters vote the way they do. Is it economic anxiety? Is it racism? One or the other. I mean, beyond the stupidity of that binary, there's also just kind of what do we mean when we talk about economic anxiety, right? Like, I feel like there's a sort of like, maybe it's Michael Moore, the influence of Michael Moore. I've certainly like this is an old idea of like this sort of like white working class Laverne and Shirley characters that work in factories in the in the Northeast, essentially. When we know that like things shifted to the Sun Belt in the 60s and 70s, and we had Bruce Schulman on to talk about a lot of that stuff. But either way, the defense part of it seems like it's missing from that conversation. It seems like it's part of driving all of this. And I think what your book does is sort of like insert it in a way that when you think about people defending their economic interests, and here in Southern California, I know very much, the conversations are about bases and whether or not they're going to be closed, and people freak out when they're going to close the base. And it's weird because it's not because they're necessarily warmongers. Right. They want to keep their businesses open, and that's a really complicated thing.
Yeah, no, exactly. And it's a good way of putting it. And I think one of the reasons why I wasn't part of the conversation was because we thought, or not we, but people, the commentariat thought that Trump was an isolationist, or that was the argument that American First is isolationist. And, he's not advocating for expansive military enterprise. He's not advocating for necessarily an increased military buildup, but he, of course, was. When we see that the past 4 years, Trump was very much a militarist. Historian Stephen Wertheim has called Trump a militarist, and I think he is. And that's a legacy of this. I think too is that we've had, because of sustained militarism, we had a politics that's feeding into it and from it, and we're reaping the repercussions, I think, now, going forward, and that's the challenge for us, is to kind of figure out, or at least what I was trying to do with the book was trying to figure out through this conversation about politics and the Cold War coalition how to find alternatives to these, to, again, Americans' dependence on defense spending and what it's done to shape their politics.
It's been an evolution that I've watched my whole life, and I'm sure you have too. And it's something that, I think back to. I mean, honestly, one of my first memories of thinking about any of this stuff was I was alive during the Reagan era. I was a little kid. I remember a neighbor who I now recognize as a right-wing neighbor, one of many right-wing dads in the neighborhood, who explained the Star Wars program to us, the missile defense system. And he said that if any bad guys shot a missile at the United States, the missile, the lasers in space would take them down. Space net made of lasers. I think The Onion actually described it as a space net made of lasers. Right. And now it's so funny to think of now, but honestly, I remember feeling safe because of that. Like literally feeling safe that there was, America is so like huge and powerful and we have such technology and such a strong military that we can feel like they'll never be able to shoot us with missiles. And like to me, that's a really powerful example of a little bit of what you're talking about, is sort of like how that stuff trickles down in terms of like a bedrock sort of assumption that is built into the culture of America having this like really overgrown military. It seems like, I mean, liberals and conservatives, however you define that, are on board with that.
Yeah, it's a bipartisan problem. And I, going back to like early childhood memories, I remember playing on the playground. I think I was about 6 or 7. So I also grew up in the Reagan era. My childhood was during the Reagan era.
Yeah.
And some kids were just hanging out in the monkey bars. I don't know why I remember this, but I do, and said, we're so close to nuclear war. Someone can push a button and send nuclear weapons, into the sky, and we can all die. And I'm sitting there jarred, like waiting for nuclear weapons to like launch and blow me out of the, like come to my town and kill me. Right. But then that followed up with a conversation with somebody, probably an adult, and saying, no, the United States is not going to do that, or we are safe. We're being protected by leaders. And, obviously explaining this to a kid, that's what you would do. But that sense of both, as you're saying, insecurity and security combined in a way that shapes you at a very formative age. I think that was also something. And then seeing, coming through my teenage years in the Clinton administration, at the end of the Clinton administration, really once when I started becoming politically aware to a certain extent, but more so in the Bush years when I became much more politically active and much more politically aware, and which really defined my politics. Obama's too, but and that's when I think I really started to make connections to that. To that time when I was a child. Once I started going through all this.
Yeah, what I was going to say is, like, when we were kids, now we know this as historians, and it probably drew us to understanding this in some ways, that, we were subjects of a certain sort of narrative reorganization of American power in the years after Vietnam. And maybe that, that can get us into some of the ideas you throw out in your book, which I think in many ways, for me, your book helps me periodize the Cold War in a different way. And part of the reason for that is because it sort of looks at sort of crisis moments for the whole ideology and examines how it survives. And one of those crisis moments, I mean, we should just go in order, because one of them is in the 60s, with Vietnam, and Vietnam becoming this sort of like moment in American history in which the American public turns against militarism in a way that it hadn't really before. And can you explain a little bit of what happens? Because it seems like the defense contractors are sort of in danger during this moment of thinking, oh shit, our racket is starting to be exposed here. So how did they survive?
Yeah, so you're right. Vietnam creates this crisis, and it's not Vietnam, sort of say 1965 Vietnam. It's 1968, 1969. In Vietnam, when things go south, or when things have always gone south, but now we really know it's not going to be won. By 68, Americans largely, as you know, because your work on anti-war activism and other things, but Americans turned against the war in late 60s, 68, 69. And there's a moment within the anti-war movement that is, I argue in the book, is quite powerful at this time, where they start gaining momentum and attention in terms of the media and American politics because of the war going the way it was. And then they start generating a larger critique of, and the left does at this time, critique of American military spending and the military-industrial complex, which is a word that kind of re-enters the lexicon after going away for about a few years. Dwight Eisenhower, of course, coins the term in 1961 in his farewell address. And it's around, a couple years even after Eisenhower makes that speech, but it really comes back with a force in 68, 69, 1970. And there's a flourishing of books and TV programs about how the defense industry, is profiting from war, and how generals, when they leave military service, they go into the defense industry and get jobs there. And there's a reciprocal relationship between the military and defense and private industry. And there's plans by some even Cold War liberals like John Kenneth Galbraith, who's an economist, to basically nationalize the defense industry and take it over, and says, this doesn't. If you really want the military to serve a public good, then it needs to be taken over by the state. That is, the defense industry, I should say, serve a public good. It needs to be taken over by the state and controlled that way. Defense contractors are anxious. They see their profits going down because we're pulling back from the war. And Nixon even talks, as cruel and evil as he is, Nixon in 1969 says we need to think about a peace dividend. I mean, he's again saying this because he's a purely political animal and he realizes he has to respond to the moment. But, he's forced by, again, the fact that we can't carry on the Cold War as we have been doing, and Vietnam really brings that to the fore. There's, again, activism on the left that's mobilizing that's pushing this Cold War coalition to the defensive. The defense industry creates this PR campaign. One of the pamphlets I found in my research at the Hagley Archives, which is in Delaware, was put out by the National Association of Manufacturers, which is what Eisenhower really meant about the military-industrial complex. It was trying to
That's so good.
Yeah, it was great, and it was trying to convince I don't know whoever was going to read this that he really didn't mean that the military-industrial complex was going to control.
It's amazing that speech is still. It's still around, and people still bring it up. It's to me, like, for a while I only heard about it from like people that talked about Smedley Butler and sort of like these left people that would bring up. Did you know that like Eisenhower said this stuff in his farewell address? But it's the opening of Oliver Stone's JFK, and which we talked about last week, which literally sets up the JFK assassination as like part of the military-industrial complex, and it's like sense of survival. So that's Stone's connection and the connection of others. But either way, it's sort of like a really important piece of like that anti-militarism thing. And I wonder, I don't know if you have an answer to this question, but I'm wondering, like, what is your sense of like how lasting was that anti-militarism strain in American public life, among the American public? Because in some ways I can see it as lasting or maybe morphing into like an anti-government thing, which is a lot of what you kind of are sort of parsing out in the in your book. But can you say anything about that? Like how anti-militaristic are Americans really? Because it seems like there was a big like moment in the late 60s and early 70s where people are thinking about the CIA and the Church Committee, and there's all this sort of like real push against the government, and particularly the military-industrial complex as the wing of the government that's gone totally awry and totally apart from democracy. I just wonder how lasting that is.
I think it's still around today, and it's taking on various forms. I think it's actually more powerful than it has been in my lifetime. Which is, not saying much. Not that it's powerful, but in terms of public sentiment, I would say Americans by and large don't like war. If you look at the polling, if you look at where Americans stand upon our commitment to quote unquote endless wars, they want to get out. They don't like protracted conflicts. They don't like necessarily spending too much on the military, right? If you say them outright, should we spend money on the military and have the greatest military on the face of the planet? They of course say yes. But if you phrase it in a different way and say, do you favor military spending over this program, over that agenda? You get much more complex answers.
Yeah.
It's how you phrase the question. I think by and large, I think, people like Bernie Sanders and others have been right about this, is that Americans, by and large, they don't want war. Most people don't want to see Americans committed to a conflict and die in a conflict that is not going to fulfill the interests of national security or their personal security, for that matter. And I think that's always, that strain of anti-militarism has always been in American politics. It comes from the left and the right. You have isolationism in the country, but you have people on the right in the 10s and 20s who are opposed to World War I. Also on the left, saying we shouldn't get involved in that war. It comes up again in the 30s, 20s and 30s. We talk about merchants of death, the idea that contractors, Wall Street bankers, others got us committed into this war. And in terms of my book, it really comes out or comes to the fore at the end of the World War II, at the beginning of the Cold War, in the Henry Wallace campaign in 1948. I point to Wallace, and he's not the only one, but Wallace is the key figure in kind of uniting these various anti-militarist, anti-Cold War elements. And when Wallace gets defeated, he doesn't have very much success at all in the 48 campaign. But what he does is create a burgeoning coalition of left-wing anti-militarist activists that kind of go into various places like the anti-nuclear groups and like SANE and things like that. And then they come back in Vietnam for the reasons we discussed. And then in the 70s and 80s, they come back again to protest, at this point, Reagan's defense buildup. And the second the second Cold War, the renewal of the arms race. But one of the points I make in the book is that there's these moments of opportunity for anti-militarism to come to the fore, but they're always turned away by structural forces that are beyond their control, or at least what they're not dealing with, in particular economic precarity and economic austerity, which is helping to shape why we are committed to American militarism, because the argument being that the United States or people who are dependent upon military spending for both economic and ideological reasons can point to a crisis moment and say, see, this is what happens when we don't commit X amount of dollars or X amount of interest into this project. And we're losing jobs. We're losing our fortitude in terms of our ability to carry out America's national security interest. We need to renew that strength. We need to bring back jobs, et cetera. And so economic combined with national security crises create these kind of perfect storms that kind of shut down anti-militarist sentiment, anti-militarism within the public, and creates a bipartisan left-right problem that we're dealing with today. I mean, and again, I think this is going to manifest too going forward, but we'll see how it does. But yeah.
You know what? It makes me think of Martin Luther King's speech about Vietnam in the Riverside Church, April 4th, 1967, in which you quoted in your book. You quote it early in your book, in which he makes that connection, and he says something along the lines of a nation that commits this much spending to instruments of war, while draining the budgets of programs of social uplift, is a nation that's approaching spiritual death. And I always love that quote. And I probably didn't get it exactly right, but I paraphrased. But either way, this sort of idea that America spends so much on war that we don't spend enough on education. That was a very key idea for me. But what's kind of crazy to me to think about, and what your book reveals in some ways, is that the war part of it is the social program in many ways, and is the economic part of this. And can you explain a little bit of how that works? Because it's really, to me, it's a really key thing. They're not separate ideas, in other words, of we either have the military or we have social programs. It seems like the military in many ways replaces welfare programs. And we've talked about how it's kind of the socialist part of American life in some ways, as horrifying as that is, because it's all, it is instruments of war. But it seems like it's more, in other words, it's more confused sort of politics than what even King is describing there.
Yeah, I mean, I make the point in the book, you're right, that social welfare spending is defense spending in the context of the post-1945 state.
Right.
Because what you have in 1945 or after 1945 is a consensus that war can create full employment, which is what World War II does. I mean, it creates near full employment, brings the nation out of the Great Depression. It can also provide, a variety of other social benefits. It's not a coincidence that the civil rights movement is renewed by World War II as Black Americans point to the fact that the United States is fighting a war in Germany for democracy, and yet Black Americans can't vote at home, the so-called Double V campaign. Mm-hmm. And there are other factors you can point to who make a convincing case that war is kind of Mr. James Sparrow's point. He's a historian at the University of Chicago, but like war is an analog for other things, or it helps move things forward in ways in terms of social programs that if you just made a straightforward case for social welfare programs on their own terms, which is hard to do in the American context. And what happens after 1945 is that you have the Democratic Party in charge of the White House, or in Harry Truman, who is, not a leftist by any stretch of the imagination, but is advocating for full employment, for national health insurance, programs that we would consider now very much part of the left. And he has this agenda called the Fair Deal, and he gets nowhere with it for a couple of reasons. One is the fact that Republicans control Congress after 1946, they do for a couple of years. And the other big factor is this larger fight that we might expect to see and we do with the Soviet Union, with the broader fight against communism as well. And what Democrats do, and the point I make in the book, is that they make a choice that if we're going to get any traction on employment, full employment, or social welfare programs, or that benefit people, we're going to have to channel it through military spending. We're going to have to rely upon war to create jobs, which is what the New Deal does through the WPA. It gives money to the Navy, to all sorts of projects to get us out of the Great Depression. And it just does that even more so, of course, during World War II, not in the same terms, obviously. And then you have a situation where Republicans are, also they're red baiting anyone who advocates for any type of social justice. And so Democrats make a decision, and I blame liberals and Democrats for this. Democrats make a decision that, this is what we're left with as a state, right? As like the warfare state is the welfare state and vice versa. And it allows you to get around certain objections made by Republicans and conservatives. And it forces conservatives, the point I make in the book is that it forces conservatives to say, no, I don't want national or military spending. Oh, no, I don't want to build up America's military forces to put America's back to work. And then it puts it back on liberals and Democrats, strength and military strength, right? And that allows them a convenient argument that they can point to and say, no, we are the Cold War hawks. We are the ones who advocate for greater, military power to fight communists. And indeed, up until the 1960s, Democrats are the largest, or compared to Republicans, the largest proponents of military spending and vote for greater appropriations for defense over Republicans until the 1960s. And this changes. And I think this is a legacy of liberalism in the Cold War, or the Cold War is a legacy of liberalism that we have to reckon with. And what it means is when this becomes the apparatus which delivers jobs and growth to many Americans, when you start to take those jobs away, the benefits that the military state provides by the 1950s and 60s, Americans say, no, we want them because you made a promise to us through a social compact that you will have these jobs, and you can't just take them away outright. And again, they're not committed necessarily to militarism, they're not committed to, as you say, they're not warmongers, quote unquote. They're not committed to even fighting the Cold War in the ways that many Democrats and Republicans are, but they just say, I want my job, I want what I have, and they fight for it, and they're willing to work with whoever is going to get them their job and their livelihood preserved, left, right, and center. And I think that's the problem. Yeah.
Yeah, and what are those jobs? I mean, how much of a factor in the American economy are we talking about? Because that was part of what I was getting at with the Laverne and Shirley thing, and it's sort of like this kind of antiquated idea of an industrial an industrial working class. I think you make the point at some point. I think I remember this in your book that a lot of the jobs we're talking about are sort of elite white collar jobs, mm-hmm. right? We're not talking about this is the, keeping G.I. Joe employed in the so he can have a suburban house. This seems like something else. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like, what are we talking about when we say jobs and defense spending? Because I'm fascinated by this idea that defense spending is sort of separate from war in even people's minds, right? It's just like, well, we need a big military, but God, no, don't want war, which is sort of a weird idea.
Right. No, totally. Yeah, so you're right. Many of these jobs at the defense industry, good paying jobs. They most of them are white collar. They require an advanced education of sorts, whether it's a BA or even a PhD if we're talking about engineering, right? Or any type of R&D work, right, which requires an advanced degree. Many of the jobs that the defense industry provides, of course, therefore go historically to white men and therefore concentrate wealth in the hands of white male elites. But the point I make in the book is that there's also, and we need to consider this when we think about the defense industry and defense spending, is that we're less so now, but working class people are wrapped up into this apparatus, whether they want to be or not. Because you're talking about, janitors who work in the defense plants. You're talking about, when you're talking about defense industries, you're talking about people who, as I say in the book, provide lunches for the defense workers, who mow their lawns, who do a lot of the service work that is ancillary to, but still dependent upon military spending. And they're in the same boat, materially, not obviously earning the same or having the same education, but they're in the same boat materially as elite defense workers, because they benefit from this and they don't want this to go away, because the absence of it, again, it's a zero-sum game. The absence of it means poverty, and they're forced to be in this coalition in ways that they don't want to be, and that creates an opportunity for, white elites in particular to take advantage of the working class and their interests and say, here, we're going to mobilize on your behalf, kind of thing, and it puts people, in a situation where, again, they're in this coalition where it's their politics are kind of advocating for one thing, which is more military spending, even though they might personally, individually be committed to massive defense spending. So we're talking about the defense industry is probably non-union, but some union. It's union jobs, but it's increasingly less unionized jobs, as most jobs are after the 1970s. And 60s, but non-union to a certain extent, white, male, educated, but there are also poor people or working class people, people of color who are wrapped up into this as well, and their politics get subsumed within larger interests after 1945.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I mean, it's making me think. I mean, all the way. I mean, this sort of idea, and I'm sure you've heard it in American history, which is this sort of idea, and I think you just alluded to it, which is that there's the war as an instrument of democracy, or war as an instrument of progress. The Civil War was terrible, but it ended slavery. World War II was terrible, but it confronted totalitarianism, and we even began a civil rights movement out of it, and had the seeds of the civil rights movement in it. I mean, even Vietnam, people tend to think of as like, oh, it taught us a lesson about war, or it taught us about the limits, which is crazy to think of. But I mean, there is, I guess, in some sense, there was I think of Project 100,000 from McNamara, and the end of the draft as both sort of products of the war, in terms of thinking about the military as sort of a piece of social engineering. But
Yeah.
but either way, we lived through the end of the Cold War, right? Like supposedly, and I think that's part
Right.
of what's striking about your book to me is like you're like, how does this survive once the Cold War ends? And there's a really like brilliant quote right at the beginning of your book from it's a guy that's Robert Meyer who's made parts for M1 engines. But he says just because the Berlin Wall went down doesn't mean there's no threat. There are still other countries. I mean that's something so like I don't know. There's something really funny and surreal and insane about that. Like the Cold War's over, but hey, there's still other countries that we might go to war with, and we're going to need tanks, and we're going to need these tanks. So line up the government contracts, and let's keep this flowing. So I guess my question is like, how does this survive once the Berlin Wall? Because it's like I think Bill Clinton has a lot to do with this, right? I feel like Clinton, and we talk about the 90s all the time on this program in part because I think we're dissecting our adolescence. But the Clinton years were years in which it was like, well, communism's over and this thing called globalization is happening, and whatever that is, it's good because it has to do with computers or something like that. And that's what I remember the spirit of the age was. But it feels like there was something else going on, and I think that's part of what you're tracking here. But can you talk a little bit about the 90s in terms of how what role Clinton plays in sort of realigning this stuff? Because it seems like it's a really critical moment, right? Berlin Wall is gone. That the threat, we can't really sell people on the threat of communism as much anymore. But and yet, here we are.
Yeah, no, you're right. Well, I mean, you had an episode with Danny Bester on Falling Down, which is, I mean, again, the protagonist or antagonist in that film is a laid off defense worker, and which kind of encapsulates all the, or some of the, a lot of the feelings that people had and defense workers had in the 90s. It was not out of the ether, kind of made up, whole cloth. There was some basis to it. Again, very fictionalized and sometimes bizarre, but there was a sense that, I mean, this is what kind of drew me to the project too, as you're saying, like being a child that's going into my teenage years or in my teenage years, seeing the Cold War end and saying, okay, we don't need this anymore. And what I then realized in studying this topic was that, Clinton actually made a conscious decision. 1992, 1993, I mean, again, I'm not talking about the peace dividend again. We don't need this, again, military spending. We can do more with our resources. But Clinton, by 1993, made a decision to try to convert defense spending to peacetime purposes. And in fact, Clinton makes the speech in March of 1993 where he says, we have all these things, Head Start programs, education, obviously Head Start, but other social welfare programs that we can spend money on. Why don't we do that? And he makes this speech at a defense community in California, and talks about closing bases, as you mentioned at the outset. Talks about closing bases in Southern California, and actually goes and says, "We're going to close this base. We're going to open up something that's going to serve peacetime purposes." But in doing that, Clinton says also, "We're really not going to touch how the defense industry makes money." To a large extent, what Clinton advocates for is the defense industry basically pursuing what's called like a dual track process where they make programs or products for the military, but also for civilian purposes. And so, and they're not interested, that is, Clinton being who he is politically, is not interested in going into defense industries or corporations and saying, you're going to do this now. Like this is from the top down. If you want defense contracts, we're going to mandate you to operate this way. And so Clinton talks about defense conversion, but he's only affecting communities for the most part that can be affected by him alone going into certain places like, Southern California that are dependent upon bases and saying, okay, we're going to close those bases, but we're actually not going to touch the defense industry altogether and how it makes money, which allows the industry to continue thriving, albeit not nearly what it was, and advocating for new contracts, new spending. And it's also the larger context of the Cold War or the end of the Cold War in the 1990s, where there seems to be a bunch of new threats that are smaller. We don't need the same programs, but we still need the same military to, take care of the remnants of this post-Cold War order. There's a series of small wars that become justifications for larger wars as you start going into the 1990s. And this means that the absence of federal policy that's going to actually go in and remake how defense operates, there was a cut, but cut the defense industry to where we would like. The absence of that, combined with a host of perceived new threats, means that there's an overall lack of political will, that you combine that with a pre-existing political economy that is benefiting from, and congressional officials who we haven't really talked about, of course, are very much committed to this, right? Congressional officials who are committed to this and the political economy of this. You combine that and you get a politics that makes sure that we continue this type of spending and the purposes behind it into the post-Cold War period. And then 9/11 happens, and that, of course, is that's where this gets taken off the table altogether. And even before that, I would argue, but 9/11 renews a spirit of interventionism that you don't see in the 1990s in the same way. And that's going to ignite the fortunes of the defense industry for are going to affect how we think about this now.
Yeah, mentioning the congressional leaders, I mean, doing my research on the GI coffee houses, I had to learn a little bit of that whole world of like that there are towns, throughout America, cities throughout America that sort of have senators and other people that are representatives in government that are their sole purpose is to direct defense money into these districts, right, and keep that whole thing going, and that's why they're reelected again and again and again. It's interesting because on the one hand, I get that in military towns, of course, there's that connection, but I think about L.A. too. You mentioned the laid off defense worker, the defense right, who was the star of Falling Down, but L.A. is a place where we've seen the aerospace industry just completely disappear there. Like, and Lockheed comes up in your book. I mean, didn't these industries sort of like a lot of other corporations, they sort of like outsourced and kind of took advantage of globalization in a way to like screw over American workers? I wonder like where that energy goes too, because it seems like a lot of there'd be a lot of people that would maybe start to identify that as against their economic interest to be aligned with these with a military industrial complex that's not taking care of them, in other words.
Yeah, so globalization starts to, this is something I asked and still kind of ask, is where globalization fits into this question, because I was trying to figure out in the book trying to see through my research if people recognize that their jobs are being cut and also sent other places. And I didn't kind of get into that. And I think because more so globalization, or the industry really takes advantage of globalization in the 1990s, much more so than it does in the 80s. But I think my suspicion is that because the defense industry becomes this kind of multinational industry in ways that it wasn't in the 60s and 50s, is that it starts to rely upon a series of other subcontractors who are already shipping their jobs other places. And it just becomes a phenomenon that gets sped up in the 1990s under Clinton, because that's what Clinton does. Clinton relies upon globalization. Yeah, I mean, that was the idea, is that globalization is going to save us. Technology, as you said, is going to save us. And all we need to do is take advantage of this new moment, this post-industrial moment, in ways that will benefit all workers. And the idea is, we just need to retrain people, right? Just give them, the economy will provide, just retrain them for jobs that are pre-existing, or going to come down the road, in a matter of due time. And that I think is if it does manifest, I think it manifests in ways for people that they don't really sort of see the repercussions, but they just get angry, right? They just get angry that their jobs are gone, and they see that other countries are benefiting, and they see that their situation is getting worse. And also they see that their taxes are going up, or they think their taxes are going up. And because their jobs are going other places, getting cut, they blame other people, other things, for their situations, or just because they're anxious. And this gets taken out on various politicians at the local, state, and national level. And so it creates this anti-government sentiment that in the 1990s, and even before that in the 80s and 70s, is very powerful, with also in this Cold War coalition that once you start facing austerity in terms of these jobs, it creates an austerity mindset amongst various people. And then this just, I think, gets heightened in the 1990s once you start seeing this bubble, that will burst eventually at the end of the 90s, but this bubble creating vast wealth for many people at the top, but not so much for others. But, a lot of these people who are in the defense industry are benefiting from it, but still there's a larger sense within American politics that combined with the conservative movement that's flourishing, that government is not working for them in various ways. And so this is, again, also where national security, Cold War, military spending gets wrapped up in our politics.
It's a death of liberalism in some way.
Yeah,
right?
No, exactly.
That's what
exactly.
It seems like, because it's like you're building the ingredients for, like, okay, a population and a set of politics that's anti-war, that's anti-government, and yet pro-military, and like pro-military spending and pro-defense industry, and sort of like, and that, what does that leave liberals with? And maybe that explains why liberals have become so, like, I don't know, militaristic. Does that seem right to you? Like, it seems like that there is like a wing of the liberal resistance, #resistance, that was very much desiring a sort of return to, like, I don't know, some sort of American prestige in the world as expressed by the military.
Yeah, I mean, so you actually hit like the crux of the book, which is that liberals are responsible for their own demise, or their own decline, which is to say that they set up a politics and a political economy during the early Cold War that will eventually come back to undo them by the 70s and 80s and 90s. That it will discredit liberalism in ways that they did not anticipate, and what liberals thought they could do, which is, as we said, channel military or channel defense or domestic welfare through defense spending. What they thought they could do, they couldn't, because eventually gets appropriated by the right and gets remade within the 70s and 80s and directed back at them in ways that they didn't anticipate, to say, like, you're not tough on military spending, and you also are putting us in a position where we're not able to pay our taxes, and we're not able to have good livelihoods. And so you need to therefore, commit again to American military, to military spending in ways that you didn't, or seemingly didn't, ignoring the fact that liberals were responsible for creating the national security state by and large, in the 40s and into the 50s. And that is to me, the story of liberalism. Is like the story is like the beginning and end of liberalism is, or I don't say end, because it's obviously still around and it's still existing, but it's different. But the way in which we think about liberalism, it's the shattering of the consensus, or if you think about a liberal consensus, I don't know if I buy into this, but those who think about it in these terms, the shattering of liberal consensus is because of the Cold War. It's not Trump necessarily, or on the right, it's the ways in which liberalism invested into a liberal international order and how that was undone, and which inevitably, I think it was going to be, even not in the same way, but it was going to be undone. And that's set ourselves up for the conversation now as we're headed into a new administration and a new foreign policy, I assume, at least in some way. But
yeah, and people talk about like this coming Cold War with China. It's like, what are you talking about coming? It feels like it's here already. It feels like that's the obvious like sort of next next part of the imperial story on in terms of global politics. And I wonder what you think of the Trump's sort of like anti-war statements every once in a while, because it's so like he had if there's one thing that Trump's great at, it's tweeting. And he had a great tweet about John Bolton, where he was like, this guy's a know-nothing loser, and all he wants to do is go to war. That's his only idea. And like you hear that, and then you hear like he went after Jeb Bush during the primaries when he was talking about like, your family just wants to go to war in Iraq, and it was like it was a big disaster. Those things seem like maybe he's just playing to the crowd there. But what do you make of that? Because it seems like, you said Trump is a militarist, and I believe that. And I actually think the Make America Great Again slogan and hat or whatever has a lot of militarism embedded in it, right? It seems like that's the nostalgia for like World War II and Patton and shit like that. So what do you make of that? Because it seems like Trump is actually, when I hear that, it's almost like he's definitely playing this sort of complicated politics you describe here.
No, I think he is. I think he taps into something which is true, which is that Americans, again, as I said, don't want to be bogged down in endless wars. And he takes that and he transmogrifies it into something that was not original in the sentiment expressed, and makes it wholly cynical in the process and serving his interest, right? I mean, that's who Trump has always been to me, is that he's a guy who is willing to go wherever his base is going to go, and that will animate people in ways that will get him love and support and admiration, fealty. And one of the things that Trump has, again, has been able to do well is to say without doing much about it, we're going to get out of America's wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. And Trump there are all sorts of reports coming out now in the last weeks and months or days of his administration that he's going to do more to pull ourselves out of the Middle East. We'll see. But you have targeted assassinations by Trump. You have, in the case of Iran, you have a renewed commitment to the defense industry, and at least rhetorically stating, right? I mean, the defense industry, we need to help our military. At the same time, critiquing the military and saying, well, the war, like these people benefit from war. And so what he's able to do again is sort of play sides in ways that I don't think he believes. I don't know what he believes in, but I mean, certainly nativism and racism is part of it. But in terms of foreign policy, I think really what Trump believes is just sort of America needs to do to get things done. And that includes using extra legal means to pursue its interests. It also includes, just making statements like we talked about. But he's still very much relying upon an apparatus that has killed many people and will be used in ways that I think unfortunately won't always serve America's national security interests. So I don't know, but yeah.
Yeah, so you identify a disturbing continuity, and one that sort of survives beyond the Cold War, survives beyond even the it's been 20 years next year since 9/11, and I think it's very easy for people to understand that there was a fervor for war or fervor for defense spending in the years after 9/11, but it's been a long time, and it feels like the sort of pain and hopelessness of the Iraq War and Afghanistan. Like, people don't think of those wars as they fostered anything in democracy or were acts of instruments of progress. I don't think historians will be saying the Iraq War brought something. I don't know what they'll say was the product, but it seems like what the main product was a lot of fucking money for defense contractors. That was a story that I think was part of a lot of liberal documentaries, if you remember, during that era, including Michael Moore. But I know we got to wrap up here. I just want to add. I just want to add a couple things and ask you one more thing, Mike. I mean,
Sure.
I've been sharing pieces of your book with Justin Rogers Cooper, who's very much interested in this subject matter, and he loved this sentence. I want to read this sentence because he called this the mic drop sentence. You could spell Mike however you want there, but either way, it's really great. It says and I think it actually kind of touches on so much of what we've just discussed. But it says, the ultimate legacy of the Cold War, therefore, lies in its ability to transfigure American politics in ways that created new coalitions of Americans to keep the United States fighting the Cold War after 1991, to align militarism and austerity with the interests of American democracy. Just again, congratulations on the book, Mike, and really, really great stuff. What are you gonna do next?
I have no idea. I've kicked around several projects. I had a project on Hubert Humphrey and liberalism because I was interested in Cold War liberalism.
That's still right. I remember you talking about Humphrey. Yep.
I'm probably not going. I know I'm probably not going to do that for a couple of reasons, but it seems to be one that people kind of think of Hubert Humphrey and they don't really know who he is, and so it's hard to kind of gain attention to him. But also I think just my political outlook and politics and affinity for certain things has changed. So I don't know. I've done all the research for that, but I'm thinking about incorporating that research into something about how American prosperity or class interests create limitations to liberalism. But I don't know how I'd make it work. The other thing I'm talking about or thinking about is, and I've shared with a couple of friends, is a book on how small wars become big wars, or how conflicts like the Spanish-American, Cuban, Philippine War, which end in a matter of months, become the origins of a Cold War on Cuba, things like that. So taking small conflicts that are really endless wars and tying them together in a way is that reperiodize how we think about war and conflict, basing it around a few individuals, particularly military officials who are responsible for thinking about strategy and in terms of counterinsurgency. American empire in many ways, or commitment to empire, thinking that they can just end this small thing here, put out this conflict here, but then it just carries on forward. So I've got those two kind of projects going around and kicking around. I don't know. My experience with publishing right now is kind of, if I want to make sure that people will like the book first before I start writing it. So I want to make sure people actually, because I've gotten to a point, and I'm fortunate to be at this point, but I've gotten to a point where I'm just kind of not interested in writing for 5 people anymore.
I hear you, dude. Yeah.
And if I do something next, I think it'll have to be something that will resonate with more people outside of, as much as I love them, our academic community, or maybe don't love them, but at least resonates beyond academia. Let's put it that way. And we'll see what that next project is, but we'll have to. Yeah, I don't know.
Well, come back and talk to us about it, because it's really fascinating to me that you mentioned, because I started off today by taking a drive and listening to our conversation from about 3 years ago, and how much the Trump era has sort of twisted both of our outlooks on politics, on history, on the discipline, on academia, on what matters and what doesn't. Totally. And the Hubert Humphrey bio doesn't seem like it's gonna hit anymore. No. That's so great, but I can't wait to hear the next step, and let's make it a shorter time between next conversations. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Mike. This was really fun.
This is a lot of fun for me. Pleasure.
All right, that's going to do it for today. Thanks so much to my guest, Michael Brenes. Go get his book, For Might and Right, Cold War Defense Spending and the Remaking of American Democracy. I am not kidding you when I tell you this book is brimming with hot takes about the Cold War that we'll be unpacking on this show for a long time. So thanks, Mike, for coming on and sharing that stuff with us. And again, if you are looking for more Nostalgia Trap takes and you want to support our show, we certainly need it. Go to patreon.com/nostalgiatrap. Lots of fun stuff over there lately. Episodes with Justin Rogers Cooper, Danny Bessner, live streams, pop culture, movies, you name it. I think there's stuff that if you're already listening right now, I think you will like what's on our Patreon. So thanks so much for everyone supporting the show. We will talk to you again very soon. Take care. See ya.